In the heart of the northern Urals, there is a silence that doesn't just exist, it waits. A land where time stretches like a frozen shadow, and the mountains hold secrets older than memory itself. 10 travelers stepped into this white void, seeking a path through the unknown. But what happens when the landscape starts to push back? What happens when the very air you breathe begins to feel like a warning? Today, we begin a journey into the quiet, lethal heart of the wilderness. Welcome to the beginning of the end. If you are listening to my stories right now, I wonder, where in the world are you joining me from? Perhaps in the quiet of the night, or amidst the rush of the day. Wherever you are welcome here. But before we step further into the shadows of this enigma, if you are a soul drawn to the whispers of the past and the mysteries the world forgot, you have found your sanctuary. Join our growing circle of seekers by subscribing to Dreamy Old Stories. Together, let us journey into the depths of history where the truth remains hidden and every story carries a secret. Welcome back. This is Dreamy Old Stories, and today we uncover a tale that was never meant to be told. The northern Ural Mountains stretch across the horizon with a kind of quiet breadth that feels older than memory. The ridges do not rise sharply but roll in long, uneven lines, softened by layers of packed snow that gather across their surfaces. Dark forests sit lower along the slopes, their shapes forming heavy bands against the pale ground. The sky above carries a muted gray tone, not entirely dark, not fully light, as if it lingers between states. In this place, the land spreads outward with a calm presence, shaped by cold seasons that return again and again, leaving behind a surface that feels worn yet complete. There is a certain texture to the air that settles here, one that feels dry and faintly sharp when imagined against the skin. The cold carries a quiet pressure, not painful, but firm enough to be noticed in the breath and in the stillness of exposed space. Sound behaves differently in this environment. It seems to travel slowly, as if weighed down by the low temperature and the open distance. Even the imagined crunch of snow beneath a step feels softened, absorbed into the wide surroundings. The atmosphere holds a subtle density, shaping every small sensation into something that feels distant and slightly muted. Across the slopes, there are quiet shifts that unfold over long stretches of time. Snow gathers unevenly along ridgelines, forming drifts that curve with the direction of the wind. Small changes in light pass over the surface as clouds move across the sky, causing shadows to stretch and then withdraw. In certain places, the outline of trees becomes clearer, then fades again as the air thickens with fine particles of frost. These movements are not sudden, nor do they draw attention to themselves. They unfold gradually, forming a landscape that is always adjusting in ways that are difficult to notice in a single moment. To stand within such a place, even in thought, brings a quiet awareness of distance and scale. The land does not offer immediate meaning or clear direction, only a sense of being surrounded by something vast and quietly enduring. There is a feeling that time behaves differently here, stretching outward in long, unmarked intervals. The absence of human presence does not feel empty, but rather complete in its own way, as if the mountains hold their own quiet rhythm. Within that rhythm, there is space for observation without urgency, a kind of still attention that settles gently into the mind. The tree line begins where the slopes soften, forming a boundary that feels gradual rather than clearly defined. Dark trunks rise from beneath the snow, their surfaces rough and slightly uneven, spaced in patterns that do not follow any obvious order. Some trees lean at subtle angles, shaped over time by the steady influence of wind and weight. Branches hold thin layers of frost, extending outward like quiet gestures against the pale ground. In certain places, gaps appear between clusters of trees, opening small corridors that lead the eye deeper into the forest without revealing where they end. Moving inward through this space, the air feels closer, shaped by the presence of wood and shadow. There is a faint scent that could be imagined as dry bark or cold resin, carried lightly within the stillness. Sound narrows here, becoming more contained, as if the trees absorb and soften it before it can travel far. The ground beneath the snow feels uneven, hinted at by slight rises and dips that alter the imagined rhythm of each step. Light filters through the branches in thin, scattered lines, never fully illuminating the space, but offering just enough contrast to guide awareness from one point to another. Subtle changes unfold as the forest continues, shaped by time rather than sudden events. Snow gathers more deeply in certain pockets, forming quiet depressions that alter the surface of the ground. Some branches bend lower under accumulated frost, while others remain bare, revealing patterns of age and growth. The arrangement of trees shifts gradually, sometimes tightening into dense clusters, then opening again into wider clearings. These transitions occur without clear markers, creating a sense that the landscape is continuously adjusting, guided by forces that are steady and persistent rather than dramatic. Within this setting, there is a quiet sense of enclosure that feels different from the open slopes above. The space invites a slower kind of attention, one that notices small variations in texture and light rather than wide distances. The forest does not suggest direction or purpose, only a presence that surrounds and gently contains. Time feels less expansive here, not stretched across the horizon, but gathered into smaller, more immediate moments. In this contained rhythm, there is a quiet awareness of being within something layered and complex, where each detail exists alongside many others, forming a quiet continuity that does not seek to be explained. Beyond the thinning forest, the land opens again into a wide, uneven pass where the surface appears stretched and exposed. The snow lies flatter here, shaped into long, shallow curves that follow the gentle rise and fall of the ground. Small ridges form where wind has pressed the surface into faint lines, leaving behind subtle patterns that shift the way light touches the terrain. Stones rest beneath the snow in scattered positions, their presence suggested by slight bulges that interrupt the otherwise smooth expanse. The horizon widens in this place, offering fewer interruptions, allowing the eye to travel further without encountering resistance. The atmosphere in this open stretch carries a different sensation, one that feels broader and more dispersed. The air seems to move more freely, brushing across the surface in slow, continuous motions that are felt rather than seen. There is a faint dryness that settles in the imagined breath, accompanied by a quiet sense of exposure that contrasts with the enclosure of the forest behind. Sounds, if they occur, seem to dissolve quickly, carried away across the open ground before they can settle. The light feels slightly brighter here, not intense, but less filtered, spreading evenly across the pale landscape. Changes within this pass unfold in ways that are almost difficult to follow. The wind shifts direction over time, altering the arrangement of snow in patterns that appear and fade without clear sequence. Fine particles lift briefly from a surface, then settle again in new positions, creating delicate variations that reshape the ground. Shadows lengthen and shorten as clouds move overhead, subtly changing the tone of the terrain. These movements do not gather into any single event, but instead form a continuous process that gently reshapes the space without drawing attention to itself. Standing within this openness, there is a sense of being placed between distant points that never fully come closer. The land does not guide or direct, but allows awareness to drift across its surface without interruption. There is a quiet recognition of scale, where the individual feels small not in a dramatic way, but in a gradual and almost unnoticed manner. The absence of barriers creates a feeling that thought can move as freely as the wind, passing over the same ground without settling. In this way, the pass offers not a destination, but a quiet extension of space that continues beyond what can be fully held in view. Along the higher ridges, the surface changes again, becoming less smooth and more textured, as if the mountain has drawn closer to its underlying form. Snow clings unevenly to the ground, revealing faint outlines of rock beneath, where the wind has brushed the surface aside. The slopes here are more angled, rising in slow inclines that do not appear steep at first, yet carry a quiet weight in their shape. Narrow lines trace across the terrain, formed by earlier movements of snow that have settled into shallow grooves. The ridge itself stretches outward in a long curve, marking a transition between one side of the mountain and the other. The sensation of being here carries a sharper edge, shaped by the elevation and the openness of the space. The air feels thinner in a subtle way, not through breath alone, but in how it touches the surface of the skin. The cold seems more direct, less softened by surrounding features, reaching across the exposed ground without interruption. There is a faint sense of pressure in the ears, as if the height itself creates a quiet difference in perception. Even imagined sound behaves differently, seeming to scatter quickly, leaving behind a brief impression before fading into the distance. Small movements continue across the ridge, though they remain quiet and gradual. Snow shifts along the angled surfaces, sliding in thin layers that settle again lower down. Fine grains of ice move across the ground in brief currents, guided by the direction of the wind. The light changes more noticeably here, as the ridge catches and reflects it at different angles, creating soft variations in brightness. These changes do not interrupt the landscape, but add a quiet sense of motion that passes through without leaving a lasting mark. There is a particular kind of awareness that forms in such a place, shaped by the balance between exposure and elevation. The ridge does not feel separate from the rest of the mountain, yet it carries its own quiet identity, defined by its height and openness. The view extends outward in both directions, offering no single point of focus, only a wide sense of surrounding space. In this setting, thought does not settle easily, but moves lightly, carried along by the same quiet forces that shape the snow and air. It is not a place of arrival, but of passing awareness, where the mind drifts as gently as the shifting surface beneath it. Lower along the slopes, the land gathers into shallow valleys that are easy to miss from a distance. These depressions form gentle channels where the snow collects more deeply, smoothing over the uneven ground beneath. The edges are soft, without sharp lines, shaped by gradual accumulation rather than sudden movement. Sparse clusters of low shrubs press up through the surface in some places, their dark forms breaking the pale continuity. The valley floor curves quietly, guiding the eye along its length without revealing a clear beginning or end, as if it continues beyond what can be seen. Within these lower spaces, the air carries a slightly different weight, shaped by the shelter provided by the surrounding slopes. The cold feels less exposed, though it remains present in a steady, quiet way. There is a faint sense of stillness that gathers here, not as an absence of motion, but as a soft containment of it. The imagined sound of wind becomes more distant, reduced to a subtle presence that brushes lightly across the surface. Light settles more gently into these areas, spreading without sharp contrast, creating a muted tone that softens the details of a landscape. Small changes unfold within the valley in ways that feel layered rather than isolated. Snow drifts gather along one side, guided by slight variations in the terrain, while other areas remain more level. The surface shifts under the influence of time, forming delicate patterns that are difficult to trace back to any single moment. In places, the outline of the ground beneath becomes faintly visible, suggesting a structure that exists below the snow but is not fully revealed. These changes continue quietly, shaping the valley in ways that remain subtle and continuous. There is a quiet sense of enclosure within this part of the landscape, though it does not feel confined. The surrounding slopes create a gentle boundary, offering a different kind of space compared to the open ridges above. Time feels gathered here, not stretched outward, but held within the curves of the land. The absence of clear direction allows attention to settle into smaller details, noticing the way light rests on the surface or how the ground curves out of sight. In this setting, the landscape feels less distant, inviting a quieter form of awareness that stays close to what is immediately present. At the edges where one form of land meets another, there are narrow transitions that do not draw attention at first glance. A ridge lowers into a shallow slope, a slope eases into a valley, and the change happens so gradually that it feels continuous rather than separate. The snow follows these transitions, adjusting its depth and texture to match the underlying ground. In certain places, faint lines appear where older layers have settled and been covered again, creating a quiet record beneath the surface. These edges do not mark boundaries in a strict sense, but suggest a slow blending of shapes that shifts across the landscape. The experience of moving through these transitions carries a subtle variation that is difficult to name directly. The ground beneath imagined steps changes in firmness, sometimes holding weight more solidly, other times giving slightly under pressure. The air shifts in small ways, becoming more open or more contained depending on the surrounding forms. Light alters its presence as well, reflecting differently across angled surfaces and softer curves. These sensations do not arrive as separate events, but blend into one another, creating a quiet continuity that is felt rather than clearly observed. Across these connecting spaces, change unfolds through accumulation rather than interruption. Snow settles in new layers, covering older traces while still preserving their influence beneath. The wind moves across different surfaces, shaping each one according to its angle and exposure. Subtle differences emerge over time, forming variations that remain consistent with the character of the land. There is no single moment where one form becomes another, only a gradual merging that continues without pause, guided by steady and patient forces. In considering these transitions, there is a sense that the landscape does not exist as separate parts, but as a connected whole that reveals itself in pieces. Each ridge, valley, and slope holds its own presence, yet none stand entirely alone. The mind begins to follow these connections, moving from one form to another without needing a clear path. There is a quiet understanding that the land extends beyond any single view, shaped by relationships that are not immediately visible. Within this awareness, the geography feels less like a collection of places and more like a continuous unfolding, where each detail leads gently into the next. The silence of the mountains is not empty. It's a preparation. Just as the snow gathers layer by layer on the slopes, a different kind of preparation was unfolding miles away, inside the small, cluttered rooms of those about to depart. But can any amount of planning truly prepare a soul for what lies beyond the tree line? In a modest room, a table holds scattered papers, maps, and small objects that carry quiet purpose. The maps are folded along worn lines, their surfaces marked with thin paths that trace distant terrain. A notebook rests nearby, its pages filled with careful handwriting, listing items in an orderly way. Coats hang on the backs of chairs, their fabric thick and slightly worn, prepared for colder conditions. Boots stand near the wall, heavy and practical, waiting to be used. The room itself feels ordinary, shaped by daily life. Yet within it, these arranged objects begin to suggest movement towards something beyond its walls. There is a soft rhythm to the sounds that fill this space, shaped by small, repeated actions. The turning of paper creates a dry whisper, while the light tapping of a pen against the table carries a quiet, steady beat. Fabric shifts as clothing is folded, producing a muted brushing sound that blends into the background. The faint creak of wood from chairs and floorboards adds a subtle depth to the atmosphere. Even the act of breathing feels slightly more noticeable, as if the stillness of the room allows each sound to settle gently before fading. Gradually, the arrangement of objects begins to shift as preparation continues. Items are moved from one place to another, grouped together in ways that reflect their future use. A map is unfolded fully, then smoothed across the table as hands trace along its surface. Bags are opened and filled, their shapes changing as weight is added piece by piece. Notes are reviewed, adjusted, and sometimes rewritten, each change small but purposeful. These actions do not rush forward, but unfold in a steady sequence, building toward a moment that has not yet arrived. Within this quiet process, there is a subtle awareness that forms around the idea of departure. The room, familiar and contained, begins to feel slightly temporary, as if its role is shifting from a place of rest to a place of transition. Thoughts move gently between what is known and what lies ahead, without urgency or concern. The preparation does not carry tension, only a calm sense of readiness that grows over time. In this way, the simple act of gathering and arranging becomes something more than routine, holding within it the quiet beginning of a journey not yet seen. In another corner of the room, equipment gathers in small, deliberate clusters that hint at future use without announcing it. Metal utensils are placed side by side, their surfaces faintly reflecting the dim light. A compact stove rests nearby, its parts arranged carefully, each piece aligned with quiet attention. Rolls of fabric, ropes, and small tools form their own separate group, each item selected for a reason that remains unspoken in the moment. The shapes of these objects vary, yet together they create a quiet order, suggesting preparation that grows through careful placement rather than sudden action. The presence of these items carries a subtle atmosphere that can be felt in the way materials interact with the surrounding space. Metal holds a cool, faintly sharp quality, while fabric brings a softer, more muted texture. When objects are handled, they produce gentle sounds that differ slightly from one another. A light clink here, a dull rustle there. The room begins to hold these variations together, forming a layered quiet where each small sound adds to a larger sense of calm activity. Even the air seems to carry the faint scent of canvas and worn leather, blending into the still environment. Over time, These grouped items begin to move from separate clusters into a more unified arrangement. A rope is coiled and placed inside a bag, its loose ends tucked in with care. Utensils are wrapped and secured, disappearing from view as they are stored away. The stove is assembled briefly, checked, then taken apart again and packed into its container. Each action leads into the next, not as a strict sequence, but as a gradual gathering of parts into a single purpose. The space on the table begins to clear, not suddenly, but through a steady process of quiet organization. Within this unfolding preparation, there is a growing sense that these objects are no longer just items, but companions to a journey that has yet to begin. Their arrangement reflects a kind of trust in what lies ahead, even though it remains unseen. The room continues to feel familiar, yet it also begins to hold a quiet distance, as if attention is slowly shifting beyond its walls. In this gentle movement of thought, the act of preparing becomes something more reflective, where each object carries a quiet connection to the path that will soon be taken. Clothing is laid out with a quiet sense of order, each layer placed beside the next, as if forming a sequence that will later be followed without thought. Thick jackets rest with their sleeves folded inward, while woolen garments sit beneath them in softer, heavier shapes. Gloves are paired carefully, their openings turned slightly outward, ready to be worn. Hats and scarves are arranged nearby, their textures varying from coarse to smooth, each carrying a different weight. The arrangement stretches across the bed or table in a way that suggests preparation not just for movement, but for enduring conditions that have already been imagined. Handling these materials brings a different kind of awareness, one shaped by touch rather than sight alone. The fabric feels dense and slightly rough, holding warmth in a way that can be sensed even before it is worn. When lifted, each piece carries a quiet weight, not heavy enough to burden, but enough to remind the hands of its purpose. There is a faint dryness in the fibers, a texture that seems suited for cold air and long use. As the garments are moved, they produce soft, muffled sounds that blend into the surrounding quiet, adding another layer to the atmosphere of preparation. Small adjustments begin to take place as the arrangement is refined. A sleeve is straightened, a fold is tightened, and certain items are repositioned to fit more neatly within the limited space. Some garments are tested briefly, lifted and held against the body as if to confirm their fit and function. Others are set aside, then brought back again, as choices are made in a slow and thoughtful manner. The process unfolds without urgency, guided by an understanding that each decision, though small, contributes to a larger sense of readiness. In these moments, there is a quiet reflection that forms around the idea of protection and comfort. The clothing represents more than simple covering. It carries the promise of warmth in a place that is not yet seen, but already imagined. There is a subtle awareness of the body and its needs, of how it will respond to cold and distance. This awareness does not bring concern, only a calm recognition of what lies ahead. Through this process, preparation becomes a gentle alignment between the present moment and a future that is slowly taking shape. Near the edge of the room, a pack rests open with its frame visible, its straps lying loose across the floor. Its shape is simple yet purposeful, designed to hold weight close to the body. Smaller compartments line the inside, waiting to be filled with care. Buckles hang slightly apart, their metal edges catching a faint line of light. Beside it, another pack stands upright, already partly filled, its sides beginning to take on a fuller form. Together, they create a quiet presence, suggesting movement that has not yet begun, but is already being prepared for in careful detail. The act of placing items into these packs carries its own quiet rhythm. Fabric brushes against canvas with a low, steady sound, while metal pieces touch briefly, producing soft, contained notes. The hands move slowly, feeling for balance, as weight is distributed from one side to another. There is a sense of pressure in the fingers as straps are tightened, a slight resistance that gives way as the material adjusts. Even the air seems to shift around the movement, carrying the faint scent of packed cloth and worn surfaces that have been used before. As more items are added, the shape of each pack begins to change in subtle ways. What was once flat becomes rounded, then firm, as the contents settle into place. Straps are drawn tighter, pulling the form inward so that nothing hangs loosely. Occasionally, an item is removed and repositioned, not out of uncertainty, but to achieve a better balance. The process unfolds in small corrections, each one refining the structure without drawing attention to itself. Over time, the packs take on a quiet completeness, shaped by steady and deliberate handling. There's a quiet understanding that forms through this process, one that connects the weight of these objects to the path ahead. Each item now sits within the pack, not as a separate thing, but as part of a whole that will be carried forward. The room begins to feel less central, as attention shifts toward what these packs represent. They hold the means to continue, to move beyond the familiar and into something wider. In this awareness, preparation becomes less about the objects themselves and more about the quiet readiness to carry them into the unknown. Near the doorway, documents and small papers gather in a thinner, more fragile arrangement than the heavier equipment nearby. Identification cards, folded permits, and handwritten notes are placed into a simple envelope, its edges slightly worn from use. A map is folded again along its original lines, though new creases have begun to form where it has been opened and studied. A pencil is tucked alongside it, its tip sharpened with quiet care. These items occupy little space, yet they carry a different kind of weight, one tied not to the body, but to direction and recognition beyond the room. Handling these papers creates a softer, more delicate set of sensations. The texture of the pages feels thin and dry, bending easily under the pressure of the fingers. Each movement produces a faint rustling sound, lighter than fabric, more fleeting than metal. The air carries a subtle scent of paper and graphite, barely noticeable, yet present enough to mark the moment. When the envelope is closed, there is a gentle friction as the flap settles into place, a small action that signals completion in a way that feels quieter than the packing of larger objects. As these documents are gathered, small changes take place in how they are arranged and secured. A note is rewritten to clarify a detail, its lines traced more carefully the second time. The map is adjusted slightly before being folded again, its edges aligned with greater precision. Items are checked once more, not out of doubt, but as part of a steady process that values completeness. Finally, the envelope is placed into a pocket or pack, disappearing from view while remaining easily reachable, as if its presence must stay close without being constantly seen. There is a quiet reflection that accompanies these final steps, one that centers not on the object themselves, but on what they allow. These papers connect the present moment to places not yet reached, offering guidance without revealing the full path. They suggest structure within uncertainty, a way to move forward while holding onto small points of reference. In this awareness, preparation extends beyond physical readiness, touching on the need to orient oneself within a larger space. The act of folding and storing becomes a quiet acknowledgement that the journey will require both movement and understanding. As the preparation nears its quiet conclusion, the room begins to shift in its arrangement in ways that feel subtle but noticeable. Spaces that were once filled with objects now open up, revealing the surface of the table and the floor beneath. Chairs are moved slightly back into place, no longer holding coats or scattered items. The packs stand upright, closed and ready, their shapes firm and complete. Smaller objects have disappeared into pockets and compartments, leaving behind only a few remaining traces of activity. The room does not return to what it was before, but settles into a different order, shaped by what has been gathered and removed. The atmosphere carries a faint sense of completion, one that can be felt in the absence of earlier sounds. The turning of pages and the shifting of equipment have faded, replaced by a quieter presence that feels more contained. Even the air seems lighter, no longer holding the layered textures of fabric and metal in motion. There is a softness to this moment, where the senses notice less movement and more space. The room feels easier to take in as a whole, its boundaries clearer, its surfaces less interrupted by the actions that filled it before. A final sequence of small actions unfolds, gentle and unhurried. A strap is checked once more, pulled slightly tighter before being left as it is. A glance passes over the arranged packs, not searching for anything new, but acknowledging what has already been done. A window may be looked through briefly, as if to measure the outside light against the readiness inside. Nothing significant changes in these moments, yet they carry a quiet sense of transition, marking the shift from preparation into the pause that comes just before departure. Within this pause, there is a calm awareness that settles into the space left behind by movement. The room holds the memory of what has taken place, even as it appears more open and quiet. Attention drifts between the familiar surroundings and the idea of what lies beyond them, without urgency or anticipation. There is no need to rush forward, only a gentle recognition that everything necessary has been brought together. In this still interval, preparation reaches its quiet end, not with a clear signal, but with a gradual easing into readiness. Every strap tightened, every map folded, and every boot laced was a silent promise to return. But as the familiar walls of the room were left behind, replaced by the vast, unyielding gray of the horizon, that promise began to feel heavier with every mile. They were no longer preparing for a journey. They were living it. At the beginning of the journey, the path is still marked by signs of familiar life. A narrow road stretches outward from a small settlement, bordered by low buildings that sit close together as if sharing warmth. Wooden fences run along the edges, their lines slightly uneven, guiding the eye forward. Footprints overlap in the snow, layered from different people moving through the same space. Smoke rises faintly from chimneys, drifting upward before fading into the pale sky. The figures of the travelers appear within this setting as part of it, not separate, moving steadily along a route that still feels connected to daily routine. As they continue, the atmosphere begins to shift in ways that are felt rather than immediately seen. The sounds that once filled the air grow thinner, replaced by quieter elements that carry less complexity. The distant murmur of voices disappears, leaving behind the faint rhythm of footsteps pressing into snow. Each step produces a soft, compacted sound, steady and consistent, accompanied by the subtle brushing of fabric as bodies move forward. The cold air feels sharper with distance, touching the face more directly, while breath becomes more noticeable, forming quiet patterns that dissolve quickly into the open space. Gradually, The surroundings begin to alter their character as the group moves further away. The buildings fall behind, replaced by stretches of open ground where fewer marks remain on the surface. The path becomes less defined, blending into the surrounding snow until it is no longer clearly separate. Trees begin to appear more frequently, forming loose clusters that suggest a transition into a different kind of space. The movement of the group continues without pause, yet the environment around them begins to take on a quieter presence, shaping the journey in subtle ways that unfold step by step. Within this slow progression, there is a quiet awareness that develops around distance and direction. The familiar sense of place begins to loosen, replaced by a growing connection to the path itself, rather than to any fixed point behind them. Thoughts settle into the rhythm of walking, guided by the steady repetition of steps rather than by conversation or distraction. There is no clear moment where the journey becomes isolated, only a gradual recognition that the world around them has shifted. In this awareness, movement becomes not just a physical act, but a gentle transition into a space that feels increasingly removed from what was once known. As the route stretches farther from the last traces of settlement, the land opens into long corridors of snow that seem to guide the travelers forward without clear markers. The ground undulates in gentle rises, each one revealing another span of pale distance beyond. Sparse trees stand apart from one another, their spacing wider now, allowing more of the horizon to come into view. The figures move in a loose line, each person following the path created by the one ahead. Their shapes appear smaller against the widening landscape, gradually blending into the scale of the surroundings. The experience of moving through this space carries a quiet rhythm shaped by repetition and breath. The sound of boots pressing into snow forms a steady pattern, soft but consistent, creating a kind of subdued cadence that continues without interruption. The cold air feels clearer here, entering the lungs with a faint sharpness that settles quickly. There is a gentle tension in the body from the effort of walking, not overwhelming, but constant enough to be noticed. The weight of carried packs presses lightly against shoulders and backs, reminding each traveler of the distance that continues to unfold ahead. Over time, small adjustments begin to appear in the way the group moves together. The spacing between them shifts, sometimes narrowing as the path becomes less certain, then widening again when the ground opens. One traveler may pause briefly, adjusting a strap or looking ahead before continuing. Tracks left behind form a visible line that curves gently with the terrain, marking their passage in a way that feels temporary yet present. The direction remains steady, though the exact shape of the route changes slightly with each step, guided more by the land than by any fixed plan. Within this gradual movement, there is a subtle awareness of separation that grows quietly in the background. The connection to the place they left behind becomes less immediate, not through any clear break, but through the steady accumulation of distance. Attention shifts forward, following the line of travel rather than turning back. The journey begins to feel less like a movement between 2 points and more like a continuous, unfolding path. In this quiet realization, the act of walking takes on a different meaning, becoming both the method of travel and the experience itself. The route begins to rise gently as the group approaches a low incline, where the ground lifts almost imperceptibly at first before forming a broader slope. The surface underfoot becomes slightly firmer, shaped by wind that has pressed the snow into a denser layer. Fewer trees stand here, and those that remain appear shorter, their branches thinner and more spaced apart. The horizon widens again, stretching in a pale arc that seems to extend without interruption. The figures continue upward in a quiet line, their movement steady, each step placing them a little higher within the open terrain. The sensation of the climb settles into the body in a subtle but noticeable way. Breathing deepens slightly, not from strain, but from the gradual change in elevation. The air feels more exposed against the skin, brushing across faces and hands with a cooler, more direct touch. The sound of footsteps shifts as well, becoming slightly sharper where the snow is more compacted. There is a faint awareness of effort in the legs, a steady engagement that does not demand attention, but remains present in the background of each movement. As they continue upward, the pattern of movement adjusts to match the slope. Steps become slightly shorter, more deliberate, following the incline with quiet consistency. The line of travelers curves gently across the surface, adjusting its direction to find a smoother path. Occasionally, one person shifts their footing, pressing more firmly to maintain balance before continuing forward. The marks left behind form a faint trail that angles across the slope, tracing their progress in a way that feels temporary, yet clearly shaped by their passage. Within this gradual ascent, there is a growing sense of distance that feels less tied to physical space and more connected to perception. The ground below seems to recede, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet shift of awareness that comes with height. The familiar elements of the journey begin to feel further removed, replaced by a broader view that offers less detail and more openness. Thought follows this widening perspective, becoming less focused on specific points and more attuned to the overall movement through space. In this way, the climb becomes not just a change in elevation, but a gentle expansion of how the journey is experienced. The path leads toward a narrow stretch where the terrain draws inward, forming a shallow corridor between low rises of snow and scattered rock. The ground here is less even, shaped by subtle variations that guide the direction of travel. Small outcrops appear through the surface, their edges softened by frost, but still visible as darker interruptions against the pale surroundings. The corridor does not feel enclosed in a strong sense, yet it directs movement in a way that feels gently guided. The figures pass through this space in sequence, their line adjusting to the natural shape of the land as it curves forward. The experience within this narrower passage carries a slightly altered quality of sound and presence. Footsteps seem closer together, not because they are louder, but because the surrounding ground reflects them in a different way. The air feels a little more contained, brushing past the body with a quieter flow. There is a faint awareness of proximity, of a land drawing nearer on either side, creating a subtle shift in how space is perceived. Even the rhythm of walking seems to tighten slightly, adapting to the shape of the path without requiring conscious thought. As they move through this section, small changes unfold in how the group navigates the terrain. The line becomes more compact, with each traveler following more closely behind the other. Occasional pauses occur where the ground dips or rises unexpectedly, prompting brief adjustments in footing. A hand may reach out to steady balance, or a step may be placed more carefully before continuing. These actions do not interrupt the flow of movement, but shape it in quiet ways, allowing the group to pass through without difficulty while remaining attentive to the ground beneath them. Within this guided passage, there is a subtle shift in awareness that centers on direction and continuity. The path feels more defined, not through clear markings, but through the way the land itself suggests a route forward. Attention narrows slightly, focusing on the immediate steps rather than the wider distance. There is a quiet sense of moving through rather than across, as if this stretch of land offers a brief transition within the larger journey. In this moment, movement becomes more concentrated, carrying the group forward with a gentle sense of alignment between their path and the shape of the terrain. As the corridor opens again, the ground stretches outward into a broader field where the surface appears more exposed to the sky. The snow here carries faint ripples, shaped by earlier winds that have passed across it in long, sweeping lines. The land feels flatter, though slight undulations continue beneath the surface, guiding the direction of travel in quiet ways. The figures spread out a little more as space allows, no longer held close by the narrow passage. Their movement becomes less constrained, following a path that is no longer defined by edges, but by the gentle rise and fall of the open ground. The experience of crossing this wider space brings a different sense of rhythm, one that feels more extended and even. The sound of footsteps returns to a softer pattern, absorbed into the broader surroundings. The air moves with a lighter touch, carrying a faint sense of openness that contrasts with the earlier enclosure. There is a subtle shift in how distance is felt, as the horizon stretches further and the space ahead appears more continuous. The body settles into a steady pace, neither quickening nor slowing, guided by the quiet consistency of movement across the open field. Gradually, small variations begin to appear across the surface, shaping the journey in ways that remain understated. Slight ridges form where snow has gathered unevenly, creating gentle lines that the group moves across or around. A shallow dip in the ground alters the angle of their path, guiding them into a new direction without any clear marker. The spacing between travelers shifts again, sometimes widening as the terrain opens, then narrowing briefly when the ground becomes less even. These adjustments unfold naturally, forming a quiet pattern of movement that adapts to the land as it continues. Within this broader space, there is a quiet awareness of exposure that settles into the mind. The absence of nearby features creates a sense of openness that feels both expansive and subtle at the same time. Attention drifts outward, following the line of the horizon rather than focusing on immediate details. The journey begins to feel less contained, not tied to a specific path, but carried forward across a wide and continuous surface. In this awareness, movement becomes more about presence within the landscape, rather than progress toward any single point. As the day stretches on, the light begins to soften in a way that changes how the land is seen. The brightness that once spread evenly across the snow now tilts gently, creating longer shadows that trace the shallow rises and dips of the ground. The figures move through this altered light, their outlines becoming slightly more defined against the surface. The horizon takes on a faint gradient, shifting from pale white to a deeper gray as the sky lowers toward evening. The landscape does not become unfamiliar, but it begins to feel quieter in tone, as if the day itself is easing into a slower rhythm. The sensation of movement adjusts with this change in light, becoming more inward and measured. The body feels the accumulated distance in a calm and steady way, not as strain, but as a quiet awareness of effort carried over time. The air grows slightly sharper again, touching the face with a cooler presence as the temperature begins to shift. The sounds of footsteps seem softer now, blending more completely into the surrounding space. Even breathing takes on a slower pattern, settling into the pace of the fading light and the extended journey. Subtle changes continue to unfold as the group moves forward into this later part of the day. The spacing between them narrows slightly, not from necessity, but from a shared adjustment to the dimming environment. A glance is cast toward the horizon, measuring distance against the remaining light. Steps become a little more deliberate, placed with quiet care as shadows stretch across the ground. The trail behind them grows longer, a faint line that curves through the landscape, marking their passage in a way that feels both present and gradually fading. Within this transition, there is a quiet recognition that the journey has entered a different phase. The movement that began in familiar surroundings now carries a deeper sense of separation, shaped by distance, time, and the changing light. Thoughts settle into a slower rhythm, less focused on where the path began and more attuned to where it continues. The world behind feels further away, not through any sudden break, but through the steady accumulation of steps. In this awareness, the act of traveling becomes a quiet extension of time itself, unfolding gently into the evening. The light is fading now. The shadows are stretching longer, pulling the travelers deeper into a world where the horizon has no end. They've left the last signs of life behind, and the cold is no longer a guest. It is their constant companion. But as the darkness of the first night settles in, a chilling realization begins to dawn. Something about this path feels different. Something is shifting in the wind. And tomorrow, we find out if they are truly alone in this frozen expanse.